Welcome to Holistic Accountant Podcast, where we aim to showcase how adopting a holistic approach in accounting and tax maximizes value for clients. Beyond traditional tasks like preparing financial statements and tax returns, a holistic accountant focuses on offering advice that maximizes personal wealth on an after-tax basis. If you enjoy this episode, please consider leaving a rating and sharing it with those who might also benefit. And to ensure you stay updated, subscribe to our weekly email. The link is in the show notes. Okay, today, Mena, I would like to talk about living inheritance, which is really bequeathing money, passing on money to your beneficiaries for most people, or the most common beneficiaries are our children, of course, and helping them as much as you possibly can without necessarily compromising your own financial position, of course. And we find, in particular, the most common concern is helping children into the property market. We find that's kind of the key thing. And then as people get kind of deeper into retirement, the second common situation is really then passing on that wealth. Because quite often when parents are deeper into retirement, kids are more established. They've potentially got their own families as well. But the problem in that situation is they've got some pressure in terms of income and expenses and tend to have larger home loans as well. And so naturally parents are starting to think, well, why don't we give them some money? Better for them to get it now rather than, in 20 years after they've sort of done those hard yards and don't necessarily need it, in inverted commas.
So I'll probably start from a tax perspective, as typically an accountant would. So there's a few tax optimization strategies when considering a living inheritance. And the first one's around superannuation. Now, when you die, your death benefit, if you're leaving it to a non-dependent, then there's a tax consequence associated with that. So if you're planning to leave basically funds to someone that's not a dependent, it might be beneficial to actually make those whilst you're alive, assuming, of course, you're in pension phase and can withdraw the funds out of super. It might be beneficial to do that whilst you're alive and actually can just withdraw it as a pension and give it to that non-dependent. Now, there's also capital gains tax strategies. So, transferring assets may allow beneficiaries sort of to capitalize on lower sort of tax brackets. So, as Stuart mentioned, if you do it too late, your children might be a lot more established in life. They might be at much higher taxable income brackets and so forth. So it might be a benefit of doing it at a time where they're still establishing themselves. And you can still govern it in a certain way so they don't misuse or misappropriate the funds, but allow them to use it whilst they're at lower tax rates.
As I said at the beginning, the challenge or the observation that most people make is that people tend to receive inheritances too late. There's certain lifetime events like buying a home, could be starting a business, funding children's education. If grandparents are of a mind or they would like to give their children the possibility of sending their grandchildren to private education, for example, but they're not in a position to afford it, that can be an event. And then just helping children through difficult periods of their lives. Again, if they're starting a young family, typically, one spouse isn't working as much or maybe is on maternity or paternity leave. Expenses are higher. They tend to have a large indebtedness at that time, and that can be a period of time to help children. So it's really about being aware that, these events can occur. And I guess it's also a bit of a parental choice as well, because in some way a struggle is a bit of a rite of passage, and it also does give people a tremendous amount of satisfaction. If they're able to sort of grind it out and get through it, that helps build, a person's resilience and confidence in themselves and so forth. If parents just sort of parachute in and save them from that struggle, there's an argument to make that, you rob your child, the ability of sort of enjoying that outcome in life and that struggle, if you like. So, there's many sort of considerations here. I guess what we want to talk about in this episode is really, if you are of a mind to do it, how do you do it so that you're not putting yourself at risk and not putting, the family's wealth at risk? So, of course, the first thing you need to think about is, to what extent can you help family without compromising your own position? And I guess there you've got to think about the longevity risk, as medical treatments advance. And I'm sure with AI, there'll be, that advancement will grow in pace. I think it's reasonable to assume that. Well, I think there's, people that are born today are definitely going to probably live beyond 100 years. And the other thing too, when we look at life expectancy tables, we've got to realise that's median data. So 50% of people live longer than that life expectancy in that table. So that's the thing, right? So you don't want to give away all your money and then risk, being in a situation in your late 80s where you don't have two pennies to rub together. But ultimately, you don't necessarily want to die in your late 80s, for instance, with, several millions of dollars in the bank when potentially your beneficiaries could have utilised that. And the benefit is that you could have enjoyed witnessing them utilise it. So having a good plan and a long-term plan, making sure that your own financial position is secure, is the key to unlocking, working out, how much you can help kids, to what extent, and what that looks like. Whether it's a sort of a regular kind of income stream if you're paying for private school fees, or whether it's a lump sum gift or contribution or some sort of other way of helping them.
Another added benefit is that you can ensure that the money is being used as you want it to be used or as you intend it to be used. So when you bequeath money after your death, you don't necessarily have control over how the money is used. Now, when you do it as a living inheritance, you can sort of guide financial decisions, whether that's sort of engaging a financial advisor and creating a trust for the purpose of your children. And, that basically funds education or home ownership or investments and so forth. Or you can also use controlled trusts, or conditional or controlled trusts, I should say. And that basically dictates how the money is spent and how it should be managed and at what points can it actually be accessed.
I should jump in here, Mena. I mean, one of the concerns that people sometimes have is that if we bequeath a bunch of money, that the person's just going to run off to the casino or go and book a really luxurious holiday. I actually find the complete reverse is true. So clients of mine that have received a living inheritance, like an early gift, they tend to receive that with a tremendous amount of responsibility. And in every situation, in fact, I can't think of a situation where it hasn't occurred, they spend that money in line with exactly how, typically, their parents have intended it. To the extent where, say, the parents have had success in investing in BHP, CSL and CBA, for instance, the large caps that were listed in the sort of 80s and 90s, sometimes their parents will go and invest the money in those stocks, and we might not necessarily think that's the best way to go. The people that receive the gift go and do exactly that. Or if it's to repay the home loan, they're very careful to put all that money to repaying the home loan and make sure they don't spend any of it on any lifestyle considerations. So quite often that is a concern, but I can tell you from the other side, in fact, the reverse is true.
And there's a level of asset protection that you can also achieve from a living inheritance. So gifting through trusts or structured sort of financial vehicles can basically protect you from, or protect your beneficiaries from certain creditors, divorces, or even the mismanagement of funds. So structured correctly, a living inheritance can just protect your family wealth across multiple generations. So it is something that it can be considerably more controlled than what if you were to basically do it after you pass.
Of course, statistically, the main risk is a relationship breakdown. So that wealth leaks out of the family unit, the wider family unit, as a result of a family court action. And that's the one that most people should be sort of concerned with. Now, of course, it's difficult. You can't go to your children that are married and say, oh, look, I'm worried that you're going to get divorced one day. That's not necessarily a perfect conversation to have, but there are some things that some steps that you can take to protect yourself. Firstly, if you're going to give a large sort of gift, in inverted commas, you might actually make it a loan on commercial terms. And if all parties that receive those monies believe that it's a loan, genuinely believe one day you might want that money back, then there's a good chance it will be treated as a liability when they come to calculate the relationship asset pool. And at least then that money won't necessarily leak. I mean, the risk is that you go and give your child $500,000, for instance, then your child goes through a separation and 50%, 60, 70% of that money then goes to the non-bloodline spouse. Of course, we don't want that to happen. But the best way to sort of protect the money you give your beneficiaries is really to insist on them entering into a binding financial agreement. And a binding financial agreement, sometimes referred to as a prenup or postnup, it doesn't matter if they're married or not married or the stage of their relationship. But what the prenup would say is, it could say many things, but specifically it would say, whatever financial assistance my parents have given me is no longer part of the asset pool. And of course, both parties would have to agree to that. They have to get independent advice, and they can be relatively expensive documents to put together. So you as the parent might even offer to pay for it. But certainly that would then go a long way to protecting those monies if your child ever entered into that situation. Now, of course, giving money comes with risk, right? The person that receives the money that you give away might not use it in exactly the way that you might intend them to do. They might end up getting divorced and that money is gone. I guess life is a risk. So part of it is not trying to have or obtain too much control after you've given that gift. Because at the end of the day, if you're not willing to accept that there's going to be some risks, then maybe it's just not the right thing for you. Having said that, you're not going to have any, or you're not necessarily going to have any more control after you're gone as well. The final thing I would say is that either in your will, and this is not really related to living will, but more, bequeathing money after you've gone through your estate, you could still have similar asset protection mechanisms in there. So, for example, you could have a condition of a trust could be that the trust is able to distribute income to beneficiaries, that's fine. But if they are to ever distribute capital, they could only do that if the beneficiary has a binding financial agreement in place. Again, it protects the original capital within your estate from any matrimonial breakdowns or relationship breakdowns. The other thing is, you could have a bloodline testamentary trust, so which means that the beneficiaries have to be bloodline, and that's worthwhile, but then can reduce, tax planning opportunities. I think the binding financial agreement option is better. I guess the whole point here of having or speaking about this particular topic is that, particularly as baby boomers get older, and you might be listening to this and your parents might be interested in helping you financially, or you might be interested in the future helping your children. I guess the whole point of talking about this topic is there's a lot of risks, or few risks to consider, and there's a lot of ways that you can go about it. And just having a plan and exploring all those opportunities is really the key to making sure that you find the way that's going to work best for you, your intentions, and your family and your beneficiaries. Okay, so we'll leave it there for today, and until next week, bye for now.